Hi guys, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, fraud, and specifically about Social Security disability fraud. I'll have more on that in just a little bit. So one of my subscribers, Chris, made a request that I do a video on Social Security disability fraud. He wanted to know how prevalent it was and how the government went about doing those kinds of investigations. So I have done a little research and I have some information to present today. But I have to tell you, this has been one of the funnier things that I've done in doing these videos, in that I'm always amazed at how stupid people can be. You know, there is an aphorism that says that no matter how many stupid people you think there are more. I believe some of the stories here sort of bear that out. And I think you'll agree with me toward the end of this. So, anytime the federal government sets up a program where it pays money, especially large sums of money like Medicare, it sets up fraud prevention protections in those programs and usually spices them up with felonies. In other words, when you violate these laws, you commit a felony, you lose your right to vote, you wind up going to prison in most cases. Although there are some felonies that people don't go to jail for. But the bottom line is you wind up wrecking your life when you commit a felony. And so the idea that you would try and cheat the federal government either on taxes or on Social Security just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a very poor risk-benefit proposition. And what the government does is the government sends out investigators to gather this information. So in order to prosecute you under the Social Security disability fraud prevention statutes, one of the things they have to show is intentionality. You have to have the intent, the present intent to defraud the Social Security Administration, to take money that you know you are not entitled to. And that is certainly a difficult thing to do in many respects. One of the very hardest types of cases to win in terms of a civil lawsuit is a fraud lawsuit, because you have to show not only that you were defrauded, but that in the defrauding you relied on the representation, that you had a right to rely on the representation, that you couldn't have found out about it in another way. All of these things are central in a civil fraud case that are not a problem for the federal government when they prosecute you under the various statutes for disability fraud or Social Security fraud. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what federal prosecutors say when they look at Social Security disability fraud. And in that regard, there is a lovely article from 2001 that talks about prosecuting Social Security fraud. And the article makes a number of very interesting points. First of all, it says a lot of the prosecutors think that this kind of a case where you're prosecuting someone who's in their 50s or 60s for fraud is not something that has great jury appeal. And this particular prosecutor says, that's not the way it works. Two words best describe my own experiences with the jury appeal of Social Security fraud cases: thief beware. I have yet to meet a grand jury or trial jury that has exhibited any tolerance for any Social Security offender, regardless of age, gender, or disability. And then he goes on to say, most Social Security fraud cases can be prosecuted using familiar federal criminal law statutes found in Title 18 without relying on the two Social Security felony fraud statutes found in Title 42. Title 42, by the way, is the Social Security Act. So it's also important to take a look at the impact on the Social Security programs. Cash benefits comprise of over 4% of the nation's gross domestic product. Now, that has grown considerably since 2001. Benefits are paid to about 90% of American citizens over age 65. They serve as a major source of income. And about one source says 1%, another source says 4% of those payments are fraudulent and improperly received. So, there is a felony provision in the statutes, 42 United States Code Section 408, felony provision aimed at Title II program fraud, and it says the following. Whoever makes or causes to be made a false statement or representation of material fact in any application, so lying in your application or omitting material facts is fraudulent conduct, at any time makes or causes to be made a false statement or representation of material fact for use in determining rights to payment. So, for example, if you testify falsely at a hearing, conceals or fails to disclose an event that will trigger a reduction or a cutoff of funds. If you fail to disclose such an event with an intent to fraudulently secure payment, that's fraud. Having made an application to receive payment for the use and benefit of another, in other words, where you are a conservator and you have someone who is 56 years old and worked for all his life, but now because of a stroke he can't work, so you're getting disability payments for him. If you use those disability payments for yourself instead of for his, protection and benefit, that's Social Security fraud. Willfully, knowingly, and with intent to deceive as to his true identity or the identity of another person, furnishes or causes to be furnished false information with respect to earnings. In other words, you say, look, this poor guy, when he was working before he had the stroke, he was making $100,000 a year, except he wasn't. He was only making $12,000. Well, that's fraud. And if you use a false Social Security number, or you disclose, use, or compel the disclosure of a Social Security number in any person in violation of the laws, that's a felony, and if you're convicted, you can be fined or imprisoned for 5 years or both. So, one of the things they talk about is a concealment scenario where somebody omits information. It says fraud can also be the result of an omission when a beneficiary fails to report a change in circumstance or conceals a material event. A typical concealment scenario involves a disability beneficiary who conceals his full-time work from the Social Security Administration. As hard as that is to believe, you'll see here in a little bit how many of those actually exist. The Third Circuit, in upholding a conviction in a case, identified the following elements of a concealment case. The defendant had knowledge of an offense that affected his right or her right to receive or to continue to receive payments. The defendant knowingly concealed or failed to disclose this to Social Security, and the defendant concealed or failed to disclose this event to the Social Security Administration with the intent to fraudulently secure payment of disability benefits in an amount greater than was due to him or when no payment was authorized. So those are the things that the government will have to prove. And the only real problem for the government is proving intent, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the author here makes a really interesting point. He says there are a number of other statutes you can use when you go after, this kind of fraud. He says you might find it advantageous to use the theft of government property statute. And he said, that's good because restitution is a consideration. Title 42 does not incorporate provisions related to Mandatory Victims Restitution Act of 1996. So by using this theft of government property standard or statute, you actually get more money back for the federal government than you do if you prosecute it under Social Security disability fraud. So he then goes on and lists all of these statutes: bankruptcy fraud, conspiracy to defraud, false fictitious claims, conspiracy to defraud or committed offense against the United States, altering, forging, or counterfeiting documents, altering or counterfeiting the seal of the U.S. agency, embezzling, stealing, or converting a record money or anything of value of the United States, that's that stolen property or government property statute. All of these things, using the wires for a scheme to defraud, false statement in an application, and use for a passport, all of these statutes can be used in some ways to go after people who commit Social Security fraud. Now you're probably thinking, well, how could false statement in an application for a passport be that? Well, if you use a false Social Security number, then again, you might very well be in trouble for just doing that. So that is one way that the government looks at it. There's all these different tools that the government has in its toolbox to come after you if you perpetrate Social Security fraud in any respect, but especially disability fraud. Okay, so now let's take a look at several of the Social Security fraud cases that have been brought to a conclusion through various means. And some of these, like I said, are quite funny in that you would think that people would not be this stupid, but there is ample evidence that people are this stupid. Let's look at this one out of the Northern District of Iowa to begin with. It's from the Southern District of Iowa, where this guy, John Dale Palmer, is going to do 24 months in prison. So November of 2022, he's not going to get out until November of 2024. He was charged with concealment, and he is going to have to pay $234,000 in restitution. In 2006, he started to receive disability benefits. By at least 2013, his vision had markedly improved. He consistently worked for several employers in central Iowa, including as a mechanic and truck driver. However, Palmer did not inform the SSA that his vision had improved or that he'd returned to work. From at least 2013, continuing through 2020, Palmer knowingly concealed and failed to disclose these events, which affected his right to receive benefits. So he's going to have to pay $234,552 back to the Social Security Administration. That is, after he gets out of prison for 2 years, and I suspect he'll be working on that for quite a while. Here we have another case from Pennsylvania where they filed charges against a dozen people for Social Security fraud. The charges were a result of a concerted effort to investigate, prosecute, and deter theft of government funds. Although the fraud loss in amount in these cases was nearly $1 million. 12 people together stole more than almost $1 million. We have a Wisconsin man who is going to wind up doing a year and 1 day in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and he'll be ordered to pay $98,256 in restitution to the Social Security Administration. According to the indictment, the guy made a claim to his private disability insurers for injuries he suffered to his arms in 2000, then filed a claim for Social Security disability insurance benefits in 2003, alleging the same injuries. While receiving benefits, Hynek was working at his father's family-owned printing business. In addition to his other duties, Hynek had a significant role in the company's expansion, helping manage 2 other printing companies that the company acquired. In a hearing with an SSA administrative law judge, Hynek stated the earnings on his record were gifts from his father to assist him. In fact, he was working and continued to work above the substantial gainful activity level, which would have made him ineligible for benefits. I would like to have been a fly on the wall at that hearing, because I can't imagine the eye roll he must have gotten from the administrative hearing judge when he said, "It was a gift, Your Honor. He was just trying to help me out. I wasn't working. No, I was laying back in the back moaning. Yeah, that's what I was doing, all right." Again, people do dumb things. What can I say? This is a guy who embezzled more than $120,000 in Social Security benefits. According to the plea papers, he began receiving Social Security disability benefits for back problems, which he continued to collect through 2018. But he admitted that in 2011 he took a trucking job with AMX, which included loading, unloading, and driving. He failed to disclose his change in employment status and concealed his job from the government by applying for and working under an alias using a false Social Security number, alien registration number, and counterfeit permanent residence card. So from July 11 through October of 2018, he collected $121,743.30 in disability benefits. The case was initiated by receiving a referral from the SSA fraud hotline. And the guy is going to wind up spending 15 months in federal prison, and he's going to wind up having to pay back some amount of that amount that he stole. So it just it underscores how stupid people can be. Sooner or later, particularly if anybody else knows about your fraud, you're going to get reported to the fraud hotline, and the federal agents are going to come knocking on your door. It's a dumb way to try to augment your income. This next one is my favorite, and I think you'll agree it's pretty funny. It's just plain funny. Georgia woman pleads guilty to Social Security fraud. This is from the Northern District of Georgia. It's out of the Atlanta office. So Valencia Williams has pleaded guilty to Social Security fraud. She claimed that she was so disabled by anxiety and depression that she spent most of her time in her room and could not work. In fact, she was working as an exotic dancer at a local adult entertainment club under the name Chrissy the Doll. So what happens here is when Social Security gets a tip like this, which is what happened, they got a tip that she was doing this, they send in people with hidden cameras and they record her doing this, and it absolutely makes the case for the government. So this plea serves as a warning to anybody who would conceal earnings or medical improvement from the Social Security Administration. According to U.S. Attorney, the charges and information presented in court showed that she applied for disability benefits based on her assertion that she was disabled by a major depressive disorder, and she began receiving SSI. She was informed she had to report any work activity. As early as September 2014, she began working as an exotic dancer using the stage name Chrissy the Doll at Stoker's Adult Entertainment Club in DeKalb County. In fact, she obtained adult entertainer permits from DeKalb County in 2014, 2015, 2017, and 2018. Now that's something I didn't know, that in Georgia you have to obtain a permit to be an exotic dancer. At any rate, this lady definitely didn't think it through, and as a result, she got $60,000 in funds that she wasn't entitled to receive. She's going to wind up having to repay a lot of that back to the government. And part of me has to worry about the poor Office of the Inspector General agents who had to go into the strip club and film her doing this dance to prove that she was, actually engaged in Social Security fraud and there really was no disability. These guys took it on the chin and went in there and spent 6 hours, trying to make sure they got a really good copy of that video. And I can just imagine what it must have been like when they had to turn in their expense vouchers. You went into an adult entertainment place, right? Yeah, it was part of the job. Sure it was. Sorry, to paraphrase from the movie Arthur, sometimes I just think funny things. Script from a hearing that was held in front of the House Ways and Means Committee back in 2014, when they were looking into the massive fraud that came out of New York City following 9/11, where police officers went on disability after 9/11, and they all claimed to suffer from PTSD, among other things. And the transcript describes what they were looking at. Last week, we were greeted with shocking headlines. The New York Times led with charges for 106 in a huge fraud over disability. There were cops, firefighters, and a massive 9/11 fraud, the indictment says. And the chairman says he's outraged. Well, I understand why he might be, because it was a huge fraud here. So this is really strange in that they used one attorney. There was one attorney who was involved in this. And the problem with conspiracies is that you cannot keep them secret. No matter how hard you try, the more people know about a criminal enterprise, the more likely you are to get caught. These are police officers. They know this. And they still engaged. 106 of them were charged criminally. There were about 300 who were involved in the scam but didn't get charged. But they also did lose their Social Security benefits. So in this, there are a couple of nuggets that I think are important. One of the most powerful fraud-busting teams that Social Security has is a Cooperative Disability Investigations Unit. It links with the Inspector General, the local law enforcement, and frontline Social Security staff. In 2012 alone, these fraudbusters prevented $340 million in fraudulent Social Security payments. Most importantly, fraud prevention is built into their day-to-day operations. And so, to put it in perspective, last year, about 11 million people received disability. About 1.8 million applied for disability. That same year, Social Security frontline staff made over 22,500 referrals for suspected disability fraud. That is absolutely huge in terms of what's going on. So at this hearing, they played a little clip. And it says, the man you see on the TV screen is Luis Hurtado. Hurtado was an NYPD officer until 1988 when he left the force on a disability pension. In 1990, he applied for Social Security disability benefits using a man named Raymond Lavalle as his attorney. In 1991, he was awarded benefits, including a lump sum retroactive payment of almost $19,000. He continued to receive as much as $1,700 in benefits every month until they were suspended this week. In all, he received about $475,000 from Social Security. For much of this time, he owned and operated the VIP Black Belt Champions Training Center. He taught and performed martial arts, and you can see him in this video. Well, those martial arts are going to come in handy when he's in federal prison. That's what I'm going to say. So you can see Social Security disability fraud is actually fairly prevalent, and people who attempt to defraud the Social Security Administration are not really that smart. First of all, like I said, the risk-benefit analysis should lead you to conclude that this is not something you want to do. No way you should ever even think about trying to get something that you're not entitled to. And again, as I said, if anybody knows that you're doing this, particularly one of the ways that people get caught is ex-wives, ex-husbands turn them in after the divorce because, they just can't wait to wreak havoc on their former partner. If anybody you happen to confide in, hey, I'm making a lot of money from Social Security, and they know you're working, they have every right and in fact may even have a duty to turn you in. It doesn't make sense. It's a stupid way to go. Now, if you make a mistake, there's a big difference between making a mistake. There is an article in the Washington Post, you can go look it up, where this lady was claiming that the money that she received after her partner died was going into their joint bank account. The money that was received after that, she thought it was payment for some property that her partner sold, but apparently it was the Social Security Administration putting money into that account. And when they discovered that the partner had died, they went and reclaimed $181,000 from her, which was 3 times the amount that they claimed she stole. Now, if she really had no intent to take that money, if she didn't know truthfully, then she should have absolutely taken it to trial, and I think she might have prevailed there. But as it was, she entered into an agreement where she wound up paying it back, and now she says, look, I can't even file for Social Security until I'm 83 now. Well, if indeed she was committing fraud, I don't have any sympathy for her, and if she wasn't committing fraud, I feel a little bad for her, but sometimes people get tripped up like this, and this is one of the reasons why if you ever get, if anybody ever knocks on your door and says, I'm an agent with the federal government, your immediate words are lawyer, and you say nothing more. Because you can't lie to a federal agent. If you do, that's a separate crime. And more likely than not, they're going to get some kind of admission out of you because they're good at that. That's their job. And so you don't want to do anything without an attorney. Because most of the time, things like that, the incident we were just talking about, can usually be explained by a decent attorney. All right. That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's provided some information you might not have had before. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff we ask. And if you have the opportunity today, go out of your way and do something kind for someone. It'll make you feel better. Really will. All right. Thanks. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.